Hello my friends and welcome back to another video. Today's video is going to be a recommendations video. This is recommendations for if you love Darcy Coates, you might also enjoy these books. Now, just a disclaimer, I am not saying that these books are identical to Darcy Coates books. I am saying that some of them make me think that if you like Darcy, you would also enjoy these books. I will let you know why I think that for every book, and I will give you my thoughts and opinions and all that, but just to reiterate, I am not saying that these are identical to Darcy books. I am just saying that I personally think there are similarities between them, and you might pick them up if you are looking for a similar vibe. These are all just my thoughts and opinions, so take that into consideration when you are thinking about these books and if you actually want to pick them up. So just a little disclaimer in case, you know, I get a comment or something, but these are just my thoughts and opinions, and these are just books that I think could work for people who also love Darcy. First up is a book that I actually just read, and that is Anatomy, a Love Story by Dana Schwartz. This is a story about Hazel, who wants to be a surgeon, but she gets kicked out of lessons because she is a woman. And she makes a deal with the teacher, who is also a renowned surgeon, that if she can pass the medical examination, he will allow her to continue her medical career to becoming a surgeon. However, she has to practice and do everything on her own and with no help from him or the lessons. She actually has a friend that digs up bodies for a living, which actually comes in handy. So this is a YA gothic mystery suspense romance. I've also seen it categorized as horror. I would say this leans on the very light side of horror, which is another reason why I think it would be perfect for people who love Darcy. Darcy is more of a cozy horror, so I feel like this fits that vibe a lot. There is romance, which is again something that Darcy has kind of a reoccurring theme running through her books. So I feel like if you do like that, you would also enjoy this. It is YA, so, you know, take that into consideration, but the gothic elements are really well done. It's very atmospheric. Hazel is a very likable, relatable, just great main character. She has a great personality, and I just really enjoyed reading from her perspective. I feel like that is something that I also enjoy in Darcy's books. There's always the main character who I really kind of just like feel for. I feel really invested in them, and I always really enjoy her characters. I feel like she really shines with her characters. She makes them just really likable and fun. This is also a very easy read. The gothic elements are very prevalent, but it doesn't make the book or story hard to follow, and I feel like that's another thing that Darcy has, is just she's very easy to read. This is obviously not a haunting story, but there are some interesting elements to the story. I feel like there is a lot in common between this and Darcy's books, so that is why I would recommend this one. Another book that I actually just read this month, and that is House of Hunger by Alexis Henderson. This book is about Marion. She is a poor woman who is having kind of a rough life as a maid. She's not making a lot of money, and it's a very hard life for her and her brother. She ends up getting a job as a blood maid. Basically, as a blood maid, she gets put into a house. She ends up going to the House of Hunger, and she works for this countess, and this countess actually takes her blood and drinks it, and that is what the job entails as a blood maid. And when she gets to House of Hunger, she kind of makes a connection with the countess, and the countess takes a very strong liking towards her. I think the thing that this book has in common with Darcy's is just the atmosphere. It's a very, very, very heavy atmosphere book, which I think is very common in Darcy's haunted house stories. There's a lot of atmosphere, it's a lot of build up, it's a lot of just like following the main character while things keep happening, but it's a build up, and this book has that. The other thing is it's a very light horror book. I would consider this cozy horror. In my opinion, I find it cozy because it is extremely light horror. There are still horror elements and some imagery and some intense scenes, which I think that is also something that you see in Darcy's books, but this is a very light horror. I wouldn't go into this expecting something like super, super crazy scary. This is more about atmosphere and gothic elements and build-up. It does have, you know, tension, but it's just done in a different way. This book is also sapphic and it's a little bit steamy. You know, there's a little bit, you know, a little bit something something going on, which isn't necessarily in line with Darcy, but Darcy does have some romance throughout a lot of her stories, so I feel like that is something that is a little bit similar. And Alexis Henderson's writing is just really, really easy to read. It's really easy to follow. It just kind of sucks you in, which I think is something that a lot of people relate to while reading a Darcy book, so that is why I would recommend House of Hunger. The next one I feel like is not going to come as a surprise to a lot of you if you watch my channel regularly, and that is The Sundown Motel by Simone St. James. So this is the story of the main character Carly, who is trying to solve the disappearance of her aunt. She disappeared while she was working at the Sundown Motel, and this is actually a dual timeline. There is also a haunting aspect to this story, which I think also obviously goes in line with Darcy. Darcy does a lot of haunted house stories. This is not a house, it's a motel, but you know, same difference. I think that's still very similar. I believe this is classified as a horror book. I would consider it more of a light horror, very verging on horror and thriller in my opinion, but I could see this being considered cozy horror. Simone St. James has a very easy way of writing. It's not too hard. It's not like you have to think a lot about it. It's just you get sucked into the story, you follow along, you're along for the ride, and I feel like that is something that Darcy does very easily as well. She just kind of sucks you into the story and you're just buckled in waiting for things to happen. And that's another reason why I think this has a similar vibe. It's just a very easy read. It's a lot of fun. I don't think you have to take anything too seriously, and I just had a lot of fun while reading it, which is something that I always do when I read a Darcy. I just have fun, so that is why I would recommend The Sundown Motel. Next up is The Vanishing by Wendy Webb. This is a modern gothic haunting story, and this is about the main character Julia, whose life is basically falling apart, and this strange man shows up at her door one day and is like, hey, would you like a job as a companion for my elderly mother, who happens to be this famous horror writer who everyone thinks is dead. And Julia jumps at this opportunity because, of course, and when she arrives at the estate, things are a little bit weird, a little bit creepy, a little bit spooky. So, like I said, this is a modern gothic, and when I say that, I mean it's a gothic haunting, but it's a little bit easier to read. I feel like if you are familiar with gothic horror and you read it and you kind of feel the same way I do, where the writing just is a little too dense, it's kind of boring, it feels like not a lot is happening, I feel like this might be more your speed. It's modern in terms of writing, it's not too hard to comprehend, it's not too hard to follow, you can clearly understand what's going on in the story. Two, I feel like it's not as slow as a typical gothic haunting story where you're bored for 80% of it. At least that's how I feel sometimes. Sometimes gothic stories can just be a little too slow. I feel like this one had a more fast-paced plot. This also does have a romance in it, which is a reoccurring theme in some of Darcy's books, so that is another reason why I think that it would be a good fit. The ease of it, the haunting, I just think that if you enjoy Darcy, you might give this a try. I would say this is much slower than a typical Darcy, and I would also say that this isn't as creepy as Darcy. Yes, Darcy is cozy horror. She's not super intense and scary all the time, but I feel like the atmosphere and the tense parts of Darcy's books make them a little bit more horror. This definitely feels cozy and light, but it's not as spooky, I would say. There's a little bit something there, but it's not as much as Darcy. So maybe if you're looking for something a little bit lighter, this could be something that you would enjoy that is a similar feel to a Darcy book. So this next book might come out of left field for some of you, but let me explain, let me tell you why I think that this would be perfect for someone who likes Darcy. Don't judge me yet, just let me explain. White Horse by Erica T. Worth. This is a story of urban native Carrie, and she is a heavy metal listening, Stephen King loving, all black wearing, you know, badass basically. She's a very cool character, and one day her cousin shows her this bracelet that used to belong to Carrie's mom, and when she touches it, she accidentally calls her mother's spirit. But there is also this, you know, not so nice entity that is also presenting itself now. And Carrie kind of has to go on this journey to find out what really happened to her mom and figure out why this entity is following her. Now, I know that sounds nothing like a Darcy, I know. This one's probably more of a wild card, but while this is a horror novel, I feel like this is a very light horror. I feel like it's a very easy read. I feel like it's very beginner friendly. If you don't know where to begin, I feel like this isn't too intense, it's not too scary, it's not too creepy. There is really great imagery and creepy, intense moments, but nothing so scary that people who aren't accustomed to horror wouldn't be able to, you know, try it out and see if they like it. I feel like the main character is very interesting. I feel like she's kind of the opposite of a Darcy character, where Darcys are a little bit more subdued in their character. Carrie is definitely more out there and very just like, she's just a very larger character personality-wise, but I personally really liked her, and I feel like a lot of horror people could relate to her and see themselves in her, and I think that's why she kind of reminds me of a Darcy character, just because I feel like relatability is something that they both have in common. This also has a very great atmosphere. It has a lot of indigenous folklore in it, and I really, really liked that aspect. This is a supernatural kind of haunting, if you will, so I feel like that also falls in line with a Darcy story. This obviously is very different. It's not the same kind of story that Darcy's books tell, but I do think the easiness of reading and the light horror aspects and the supernatural aspects could be something that people that love Darcy might also enjoy this one. These next two books are by the same author, and I'm kind of doing them at the same time because it's more this author that I feel like I'm recommending more than these two individual books, and that is Cackle and Such Sharp Teeth by Rachel Harrison. Rachel Harrison is one of my favorite authors, just like Darcy Coates is, and I feel like Rachel Harrison does a really great job of doing cozy horror just like Darcy. Cackle is obviously a witch story, and Such Sharp Teeth is a werewolf story. They're not similar in plot compared to a Darcy, But I do feel like the way Rachel Harrison writes, the simplicity and the easiness, they are not hard books to comprehend. They're not hard books to get sucked into. Rachel Harrison also does great, relatable, lovable main characters in my opinion. I always love her characters. I can always see a little bit of myself in them, which is something that I think Darcy also does for me personally. And these are just really good, feel-good stories, and that might sound weird compared to Darcy, but I know I always feel really good while I'm reading a Darcy just because you know what you're gonna get. They're a little bit predictable, they follow a formula, but it's a formula that I really enjoy, and they're books that I really love, and that's something that I feel like Rachel Harrison does to an extent. I wouldn't say that her books are necessarily predictable, but they just have a very cozy feeling to them because the writing is so atmospheric, and I just can really immerse myself into her stories just like I can with Darcy's, and that's something that I enjoy from both of these authors. It's something I love about both of them. I love the cozy and lightheartedness of Rachel Harrison's books, but I also love the spooky moments. You know, they're not like super duper intense, but there are some really creepy intense moments that pop up in her stories that kind of throw you off in a really good way, and it just is really enjoyable for me, which again is something that I always find when I'm reading a Darcy. I find those intense creepy moments that kind of pop up and surprise me in the best way possible because I'm so involved in the stories and engaged, and I feel like Rachel Harrison's books do the exact same thing for me, which is why I obviously love Rachel Harrison and Darcy Coates. They're two of my favorite authors, and I think that if you enjoy Darcy and you like that lighthearted, cozy, but also spooky and creepy, intense little scenes, I think you would also enjoy Cackle and Such Sharp Teeth. The next and last book on this list is The Twisted Ones by T. Kingfisher. I actually don't have this book anymore because I did end up giving it a 3.5 star rating. The other books in this recommendations list all got a 4-star or higher for me, but I really want to include this book because one, I think it will work for some people, and two, I really think that there are some similarities between this book and a Darcy book. This book is about the main character Mouse, who is clearing out her deceased grandmother's house, and her grandmother was a hoarder, so there is a bunch of stuff everywhere, and Mouse actually finds her step-grandfather's journal, and when she starts reading it, there's a lot of interesting stuff in there. It kind of sounds like rambling, but it also is a little bit eerie. And when Mouse starts experiencing some of the things that her step-grandfather was writing about, she starts getting a little freaked out. So this is a folk horror story. This is not necessarily a haunted house or anything like that. This is really going to be for people who really enjoy folk horror. A lot of times folk horror doesn't work for me because it just kind of confuses me a little bit and I get a little lost. But the reason I want to include this story is I feel like the writing is so good. If I was going to rate The Twisted Ones based off of T. Kingfisher's writing, it would have gotten a 4.5 or a 5 because the writing is just so good, especially in the first half. Mouse is a super lovable and just a fun character to read from. She actually reminds me a lot of a character that Darcy would write, and that's a lot of why I really enjoyed this book. I loved reading from Mouse's perspective. I just felt like she was a really easy character, and again, she kind of made the story for me, which is something that I do see myself thinking a lot when I read a Darcy book. The writing is just really easy to follow in the first half. In the second half, I feel like the folk aspects kind of messed me up a little bit, but that's just a me thing. I feel like if you enjoy folk horror, you would actually probably get on better with the second half of the book than I did, but the writing was just so easy to follow and it was just so fun. And it was actually really, really creepy the first half of the book, and it just felt a lot like a typical Darcy setup, like a character going into a house all alone, finding some creepy things, finding out some secrets. It's just very similar to something that I would see from Darcy. The only thing that was different was the folk aspect that comes into play towards the second half of the book. I personally really enjoy T. Kingfisher's writing though, so that is why I will continue to read their stories. I did read What Moves the Dead and I enjoyed that one a little bit more than I did the Twisted Ones. I gave that one a 4-star. I wouldn't say that one reminded me a ton of Darcy because it really reminded me of Mexican Gothic more, but I just really love T. Kingfisher's writing. I think it's just really simple, really easy to read. Again, the characters really shine, which is something that I find in a Darcy book, and I don't think that I shouldn't put this in the list just because I gave it a 3.5, because I really feel like a lot of people would enjoy this book, especially if you love folk horror. Alright, those are the recommendations that I have. Again, just to remind you, these are not identical to a Darcy Coates book. These are just my thoughts and opinions and why I think someone who loves Darcy might also enjoy one or some or even all of these books, because I also enjoyed these books and I can find similarities between them and Darcy's writing or some of her stories. So that is why I included these. Just don't get your hopes up that these are identical to a Darcy haunted house book, because most of these aren't even haunted house related. I just think that they have similar vibes to them. Sometimes the feelings I have while reading them is very similar to a Darcy. The writing can feel very similar from these books. And a lot of the characters in these books I mentioned shine a lot in the story, just like characters from Darcy's book do for me. So that is why I wanted to recommend these books. Just, you know, keep it in mind, these are just my opinions and my thoughts and my feelings, so, you know, I'm sure other people have different feelings and thoughts on these books than I do. If you enjoyed this video and you would like to see more recommendations like this one, or just more recommendations videos in general, feel free to give me a thumbs up. That way I know you enjoy it and I can keep doing them in the future for you. If you haven't, feel free to subscribe to my channel. We can become friends, talk about books, horrifying books, thrilling books, romance books, manga, all that good fun stuff. And with that being said, I hope you are having a great day, night, morning, afternoon, wherever you are, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!